This is a wonderful event. We are very, very pleased to be the hosts for these, and they are not debates, for these forums, and we are getting great opportunities to hear from our candidates for very important positions in our government. So we're delighted that you are all here, or those of you who are also watching us on television. And let me thank METV for being here to record, also SNN, and we have the press here from the Bradenton Herald and the Sarasota Herald Tribune. So we're delighted to have all of you here to listen to these very, very important conversations. This one is bringing together two of the candidates from District 72 and District 74. So representing District 72 is Ray Pilon, a Republican. We also have candidates from District 74, Robert Kaplan, and Tony Mowry, Democrat.
Thank you.
So we're glad to have all of you here. We look forward to the conversation, and I think we all leave these candidate discussions learning a lot more about all of the things that are so important to the state of Florida and the opinions of these candidates. Thank you very much for being here, all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Holbrook. I'm Emily Walsh. I'm the publisher with the Observer Media Group, and we're happy to partner with USF, Sarasota Manatee, and METV on these candidate forums. Today is a forum, it's not a debate, and here's the format that we're going to follow. We're going to open and close your 40-minute session here with 2-minute opening and closing statements, and then you'll be asked a series of questions, and we will rotate with each candidate, and you will have 2 minutes to answer your question. Now, there's a timer in front of you. When the yellow light comes on, that means you have 1 minute left for your question, and when the red light comes on, your time is up. If your opponent mentions your name or says my opponent, then you will have a 30-second rebuttal time. Any questions before we begin? Okay, we'll start with District 72 with Mr. Pilon with your 2-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity for all the sponsors and for all the press that's here. I'm very appreciative. I'd like to give a shout out to my biggest supporter, Casey Pilon, my wife that's in the audience. Glad to have her with her. You can't do anything without the support of your family. So everybody asks, why are you running? Well, it's pretty simple. I think that the last 8 years, and in fact the last 10 years in the legislature, that Florida has made great strides in the economy, great strides in the environment, believe it or not. And we not only did that, but we reduced taxes while doing it. We reduced overburdensome, duplicative regulations so business could thrive. And the proof is in the pudding. We're at 3.7 and maybe even lower unemployment. And yes, we need more skilled jobs, and I hope we'll talk about the education as we go on. But I think I'm best qualified to keep us in that forward movement because I've lived here for 44 years, raised my family here, they went to public school, have been involved in community service all my life, first as a deputy sheriff, right here in Sarasota County, and then as a county commissioner, and then as your representative for Sarasota and District 72. So it's not only political experience that I think is valuable for a representative, but it's somebody that has to represent everybody in the community, no matter what party. And that means that the biggest responsibility belongs to the people to let their representative know what they need and what's important to them so we can represent them. It's not a matter of total ideology. So it's wisdom that you gain, hopefully, from all those years, life experience, and experience working with the community. So I'm asking for everyone to look at that when you compare the two candidates and vote Ray Pilon on not only right now, because you got absentee and early voting next week, but finally on November 6th. Thank you.
Mr. Kaplan.
Yes, ma'am, thank you. My name is Robert Samuel Kaplan. I'm your independent or non-party affiliate candidate for Florida State Representative District 74. Give you a brief political past history about myself. I ran for Florida State Representative as an independent write-in candidate for Florida State Representative District 74 and received 18% of the vote. And then in 2016, I ran against Marco Rubio for U.S. Senate and received 15% of the vote. And I really didn't want to run again, but one of the reasons why I am running is because of, I said this at Tiger Bay about lemon laws, okay? The lemon laws that just was written concerning you have to live in a district in order for you to run, okay? But that's very important to me. And it says, so now everybody can run in any district now. So that was my main reason for I put my hat. As you can see, I'm a graduate of USF, by the way. And that's one of the reasons why I threw my hat, not because of a Democrat or a Republican running, not by namesake, okay? But I've been a native here since 1955, all right? And I went to Venice Elementary School. Then I switched to Epiphany Catholic School, a Jewish boy going to Catholic school. That was a real trip, And number 3, I went to Cardinal Mooney also, okay. I went to a lot of different schools, but I ended up graduating Venice High School in 1974. Then in 1976, I went to formerly known as Manatee Junior College, receiving my AA degree. And at age 50, I went to USF. I was like Rodney Dangerfield, and I went back to school, got my BA degree in psychology, and I attended the public health up in Tampa to study biostatistics and epidemiology.
Thank you, Mr. Kaplan.
Okay.
Now on to Mr. Mowry.
Thank you. Thank you, USF and the sponsors as well for having this. I think it's really important that the voters get to hear from the candidates. My name is Tony Mowry. I am running for House District 74, which is down in the south part of the county. So this was a bit of a drive up here today, but I just do think it's important to attend these forums when they're offered because especially in these down ballot races, a lot of voters, we don't have a lot of outreach. So like I said, I'm running for House District 74, the South Sarasota County. I grew up in Venice. I went to Venice Elementary School, Venice Middle School, Venice High School, graduating in '95. Went off, ultimately getting a law degree from Temple University, then clerked or worked at the staff attorney's office at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta, dealing with federal issues, federal and state issues from Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Was commissioned in the United States Air Force and served for over 6 years on active duty. And in 2013, my wife and I decided to move back here and back to Venice and raise my 2 daughters in the place that I grew up. So that's a little bio. I joined my aunt's law practice, which I took over at the beginning of this year, and practiced elder law on the island of Venice. And I decided to throw my hat in the ring this year because, frankly, I don't believe that we, particularly in the south part of the county, have received good representation from our elected officials. And being the hometown candidate, I think I know the issues, I know the area, and I have the breadth of experience to best represent the people of my district.
Thank you. Next, we'll start with Mr. Kaplan. If elected to the legislature, what will be your top 3 priorities, and what might be an example of a bill you would file in the next session?
My top 3 priorities.
Make sure you're talking to the mic.
Okay, I'm sorry, ma'am. My top 3 priorities for the state legislature is health care, education, and number 3, I just want to see how much money we have for the state legislature so we can afford health care education, and see how it can be properly allocated if we do have a surplus. Everybody was asking us what we could cut yesterday at Tiger Bay. We have to look at the monies first in order to see what we can cut. And if we don't see the monies first, it's a matter of semantics, because the left wants to raise your taxes, the right wants to cut your taxes, okay? I've been hearing all the numbers and everything. So you have to look at numbers first. You have to come up with common sense solutions. As for instance, my education plan. My education plan for USF, mind you, my education plan is this. I would cut graduate level courses back down to undergrad courses. So everybody could get a PhD and a master's degree, no matter what profession they choose. Then you have to go through, I heard about ACT and SAT test scores all the way through this morning. The bottom line is, I would first eliminate Common Core math out of the school system and make students go back to traditional math so they won't be so frustrated. That's number one. And number two, if I was to help people read, there's a great program that works in other states where the kids go into nursing homes and meet the elderly, and they could go and teach people how to read.
Can you give us your third real quick?
My third is my third is healthcare, education, and gun control. Okay.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Mowry, your top 3 priorities.
Thank you. I would say my top 3 priorities are access to health care, public education, and the environment. And one, I'll give you the example of the bill that we could file immediately would be an expansion of Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. And in fact, I note with regard to Medicaid expansion that Governor Scott was originally for Medicaid expansion until the politics got in the way and he had to change his position on that. And the reason he was for it was because it just makes sense. Whether you like the Affordable Care Act or not, it is here. And as a result of the failure to expand Medicaid, we have sent $51 billion to other states. Our federal tax money goes to the federal government and then does not come back to Florida, and we've left $51 billion on the table. Rather than take that $51 billion, the Scott administration sued the federal government to continue the low-income pool program. And really, all this has to do is with politics. It doesn't have to do with money, and it's wrong for Florida. If we expand Medicaid, 800 to 900,000 more people in Florida, more Floridians would have health care. And we're talking about the working poor. We're talking about the service industry in my district, people who work 2 to 3 jobs, because it's filling a donut hole for the working poor. And that's the first thing I would push for, the first thing I will push for when I get into Florida legislature.
Thank you. Mr. Pilon.
Well, I have the 3 E's, the environment, education, and the economy, because all those 3 main areas control everything else, all the other issues, the health plans, criminal justice, mental health. Everything depends on, in one way or another, in those 3 areas. But be specific in the education level, and I'm hopeful, I get some Medicaid things too, but we'll talk about those later, I hope. In the education field, I think the first thing that I would like to do would pass a repealer, not new legislation, but a bill to repeal what I feel is absolutely the wrong way to reward our teachers. Currently, our teachers are given bonuses, especially if they're in lower performing schools, based on their SAT tests when they were in school 20 or 30 years ago. Some of them couldn't even find it when that came into. We need to do away with that. We need to have our local school boards, and then with the state's help, make sure there are more incentives for our teachers based on how much progress each of their students in their class and their schools, rather than an SAT test 20 years ago.
Thank you. So we'll start, all 3 of you mentioned education, so we'll start there with Mr. Mowry. What is your position on school choice, charter schools, and voucher programs?
Well, I'm not anti-charter school, but I will say that I am I'm not for siphoning money from public schools to pay for-profit charter schools or voucher programs. I think that Florida has become a petri dish for that type of behavior, and there are, frankly, legislators and lawmakers that are profiting off of those payments. I think, when we look at Florida public schools, we are in the bottom 20% of both pure pupil spending and teacher pay. And that's a shame for this state. And we need to work on those issues before we start moving money to charter schools and voucher programs that are not held to the same standards as our public schools.
Mr. Pilon.
It's very interesting that the left, and my candidate does it often, my opponent, confuses vouchers, tax dollars, charter schools. Here's the fact. Charter schools, like in Sarasota particularly, with our military academy and our arts and sciences, have their own foundation board. They raise dollars. They get the per student dollars from taxpayers that everybody else does. When you talk about vouchers, my opponent wants to do away with vouchers because it takes dollars away from the taxpayer. That means that the John McKay Disabled Fund, that is a voucher fund, would go away. That means disabled would not have the opportunities that they normally have. There's also been a recent voucher program that was passed by the legislature that my opponent voted against, which allowed those students in schools that were bullied, both mentally and physically attacked, to choose another school so that they would get away from that element. So when we talk about those three areas, let's make sure that we're comparing apples to apples and not oranges to oranges.
Thank you. Mr. Kaplan.
Firstly, like I said before, I've been to private schools and I've been to public schools, but there's one defining difference between all the schools. And that is, we have to differentiate the word of for-profit. To me, for-profit is nothing but privatization. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So in regards to charter schools giving vouchers, all right, everybody's philosophy is on that. Let the public sector fund that. Leave the taxpayers out of the way. Okay, let the taxpayers fund the public schools, and divide the whole thing. That's called balancing the budget if you can do it. So when I came here to USF on October 2nd to talk about consolidation, and 78% of the legislature made it 78% across the board as a grade point average for doing their job, okay? Then they raised the grade point average to 4.0, okay? And now they're trying to dismantle USF. I want to go back and finish biostatistics and epidemiology. I just turned 63. So that's why I wanted to cut education, have graduate level courses be cut from back to undergrad tuition. Bottom line is, I figured the 1 hour course at USF, I hope I got these numbers right, is $185 for 1 hour, if I'm not mistaken. So if you multiply that by 3, that's about $580 right there for a 3-hour course. A student at USF couldn't even, if they even try to budget to save for a 3-hour course, like, for instance, drinking coffee at Starbucks,
Mr. Kaplan, your time's up.
There you go.
Thank
They
you.
can save.
We're going to move on to Medicaid because you've all mentioned that as well. So in the past 10 years, Florida's Medicaid spending has increased 100%, from $15 billion to $30 billion. In that same period, if you combine the growth in population and inflation, that figure would be an increase of 29%. The growth in total state spending in that period has been 27%, from $70 billion to $89 billion. Medicaid spending is growing 3 times faster than population, inflation, and total state spending. What are your thoughts on how to address what is clearly an unsustainable trajectory? And do you favor expanding Medicaid, and how would you propose to pay for it? Mr. Pilon, we'll start with you.
Great question. First of all, I don't know what happened to Obamacare and all those people that were going to be eligible for that because it's still available. But the economy, again, is the key. If we can continue to get more people to work, and there are now plans coming forth where separate small business groups can create their own insurance pool. So there's a lot of great ideas we can explore. The one that we can't explore is, 800,000 people. Well, the rolls of Medicaid increased after Obamacare. And the issue with Medicaid being unsustainable starts from the left's governor nominee, who wants to expand it to everybody and raise taxes, and they say not to large businesses. Well, I can tell you, raising taxes to small businesses on their income tax, business tax, will kill this economy because they won't be able to hire people. My plan is simply, and Marco Rubio even suggested this in the past, we do pay into the federal government for Medicaid. If the Democrats take control of Washington, there will be no more Medicaid or Medicare because it's a one-payer system. Hope that doesn't happen. So when it doesn't happen, what we simply have to do, and one of the first things that I'll try to move forward, is to have a block grant similar to what we have with juvenile justice funds for our state, because the problem with Medicaid dollars that come down here, started with the Obamacare strings, is it goes to the wrong people. It goes disproportionately to able-bodied working adults. Yes. That takes away from what our demographics show are the disabled, people in nursing homes, and seniors, and working families, the working poor. So let us determine in the state of Florida where our tax dollars go, not Washington, D.C.
Thank you. Mr. Kaplan.
Now, that's why I'm an independent voter, not only an independent voter, an independent candidate. Here are my plans. Actually, I want to be your watchdog for the state of Florida. I could probably help everybody out. But my plans during my U.S. Senate run was this. For Medicare and Medicaid expansion, I was going to have people over 50 or over should be on Medicare and Medicaid, who are not unemployed, not able to work, live on a fixed income, and disabled. That would have been the single-payer plan for the state of Florida. I begged them to do the numbers. It can't be done. That's half. Now, for the millennials who are not here, for this debate, who I've been supporting them, but probably out drinking coffee, but be that as it may, okay, millennials could come to USF, the parents set up a health savings account for them while they're in school, put $2,000 in the health savings account, and your payments would be at least $117 a month for affordable health care. My plans are most likely in Washington, I don't know, but I think they are. So when I ran for U.S. Senate, I learned a lot of things. So those are my plans, and they're written in stone, and I'm going to enforce them when I get up to Tallahassee. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Mowry.
Thank you. First of all, obviously, Mr. Pilon doesn't care for the Affordable Care Act, but I think we've seen that that's going to be here to stay because we've tried to repeal, the other side has tried to repeal it and hasn't come up with anything to replace it with. And so I will fight for Florida's fair share of those dollars. But I want to talk a little bit about my own experience with Medicaid because I actually deal with that every day, and the funding issues are something that definitely should be looked at. And I sometimes make a joke when I hear about block grants because I say I hope you get sick at the beginning of the fiscal year and not at the end of the fiscal year when the money's out. Because the bottom line is we have a funky way of allocating funds right now. Right now, you can get qualified as a matter of right for nursing home care so long as you meet the requirements. But if you need a lesser form of care, such as assisted living, there's a waiting list for that. And it can be up to a year or two waiting for that care. So we have plenty of people who are actually in nursing homes right now with a big $9,000 bill from the federal government that could be in a lesser form of care, but because of the way we fund these programs, and because they're block granted from the state, basically, we actually spend more on their care than is necessary. I have expertise in this area, and it's something that I would certainly look at from part of it is federal and part of it is state. So there's a federal element that needs to be looked at, but there need to be state legislators who understand these issues and can work with the federal government to make sure that people are taken care of in the most cost-effective way.
Mr. Pilon, you have a 30-second rebuttal time.
Yeah, I'm glad he agrees with me that there's a waiting list and that we need to correct that. As far as block grants go, it's not a matter of when it comes down. The appropriations are appropriations. I worked in the juvenile justice area where we received all of our dollars in a block grant based on our demographics in Florida to give to the juveniles that most needed it and for prevention, diversion, and intervention. So you make my point. We have a waiting list. Well, if you continue to do it the way we're doing, that waiting list will change. Sure, we can change those laws, talk about experience. That's a great idea. Maybe I'll take that with me when I get to Tallahassee. Maybe we need to adjust those qualifications, but we can't do it under the federal guidelines. It's not a block grant from the state of Florida.
Thank you. Let's move on to environment. We'll start with Mr. Kaplan. Moat Marine, the Florida Wildlife Commission, and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection recently announced more monitoring and research of red tide. What more can the state do to address the problem, if anything at all?
This is what I said at Tiger Bay yesterday, I believe it was. No, I'm sorry, Thursday. They have to fix Lake Okeechobee. They have to fix Lake Okeechobee. That's the bottom line. They have to fix the dam first. This is what really happened when all this algae bloom, red tide came about, most likely. Okay? Back in 2015, and I've been saying this till I'm blue in the face. Back in 2015, the Florida State Legislature voted, which was like 74 representatives, voted for moving the waters before it didn't even pass in the Senate. So it moved the waters in the Everglades, okay, first. Then it trickled up all the way up to St. Johns River, okay? Am I done? To St. Johns River, then it came back down to Lake Okeechobee, and it went all the way down, and that's why we have this red tide and algae bloom. Okay? They moved the waters. It destroyed all the corn crops and the sugarcane crops, okay, in Marathon County, in the Key West. I was very, very, very upset about that. So what is the main ingredient for sugarcane and corn? Ethanol. Well, isn't it ironic that all the Hess gas stations in Florida were sold because of that? Okay? So y'all need to know that. A lot of people made a lot of money out of that deal. I'd like to know who did, but I probably won't find the answer. So that's why you need a watchdog in Tallahassee to make people accountable to stop playing pocket pool with your money. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Mowry, what do you think the state should do to address red tide?
Well, I think the state needs to start holding polluters accountable. That hasn't happened over the past, the Scott administration. We know that he's gutted the Department of Environmental Protection. He's loosened water regulations. Both Scott and the Republican legislature have allowed unfettered growth by removing comprehensive planning, statewide planning. So, look, there's not going to be a crop duster flying over the water to spray something on it. That's not how we fix the problem. We have to address it in a multitude of ways, including Everglades restoration and fixing the Lake Okeechobee discharges. There are plans out there for that. We own the land. The state owns the land. We just need the political will to do it. So you know, a lot of people want to point a finger at a boogeyman, and I think that's the wrong way to look at this, because I think it's a collective action, and that's what needs to be done. So the problem with pointing fingers at everybody is that it doesn't really solve the problem. All of us have a responsibility to care for our environment, and so there are things, however, we can do at the state level to make sure that happens.
Mr. Pilon.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Mowry, for getting that pointing the fingers out of the way. That does nobody any good, because no single person or no single legislature has caused these problems. And first of all, I'm going to talk about red tide. If you want to talk about Lake Okeechobee, I've been involved with those issues for almost 20 years, and I think I have a pretty good handle on what's going to happen, what the causation factors, and what we need to do. Red tide. We had an October surprise. Yeah, with the Lake Okeechobee and the red tide. That gave everybody the opportunity to make that the biggest issue in the state of Florida. And it's a big one, because our economy depends on it. Our economy, our tourism, our businesses have all suffered. Well, the state reacted with a plan. We're getting business assistance to those people. We are getting more money to red tide. Vernon Buchanan, our congressman, has got appropriations coming in the millions and millions. So we know how to react to an emergency, just like we're reacting to the hurricane. We need cooperation between the federal government, the state government, and the locals. Sarasota County, for years, we have a fertilizer ordinance. I got money for, when I was in the legislature, for the restoration of Philippi Creek, the septic to sewer program. We need more septic to sewer programs. That's a partnership that we have to have. Donna Bay to the south had so much fresh water flowing into it and stormwater runoff that it killed all the oysters. We're now working on restoring that area, and I was very active in getting those monies to come to us. So I think it's a matter of cooperation. We know it's a natural occurring event, and we could debate whether Lake Okeechobee and the algae coming down the river to Fort Myers added to it or not. I rely on the scientists. I want more scientific information and more quantitative information on what the human factor is. Then we can decide and have a plan to correct it.
Mr. Mowry, would you like a chance to respond?
I would just like to say that obviously I'm not running against Mr. Pilon. My opponent is not here, and I frankly look forward to working with him if we're both elected on these issues, because good guy. Because I think that he has a better handle of things than my opponent does, certainly by evidence of his Tiger Bay answer to a similar type question about finding money in the budget. He, despite running for office for a year, he didn't know anything about the budget. So I just want to point out that it's competence in this area that's really going to solve these problems, and not finger pointing.
And we're going to end with closing statements, and we'll start with you, Mr. Mowry.
Okay, thank you. Good. I'll roll right into competence then. As you know, as I've said, my opponent is not here. And the bottom line is I do not believe that he wants to face the voters, because every time we appear together, it's clear who is the most competent lawmaker. I think as far as Mr. Pilon and I are concerned, and many of the Republicans that I know, we have a lot more common ground than we do not common ground. Election year is about finding those issues, those wedge issues, but the bottom line is when you look at the two candidates and who's going to work the best for the people of my district, my hometown, there's really no comparison. I have worked at multiple levels of government. I'm experienced in helping people in my district, the elderly population that was mentioned before, which is the core of our district. I know the local issues, having grown up there, and I care about the people of my district. I am not looking for, I'm going to make a joke, actually. I keep telling people that my opponent is just looking for a friendly district to run in. I'm clearly not, because I wouldn't have chosen District 74 as a Democrat. I'm looking to represent my hometown, and I think that the people of the district will see that, and they'll see the competence. And so I ask if anybody is here from 74, which I doubt, if I could have your vote. Thank you.
Mr. Pilon.
Thank you very much again to USF, to the Public Policy and Leadership Group who's sitting there intently in the front row, and to the Observer for you conducting another great moderation. The choice is pretty simple in my race. I'm sure people will vote their ideology on both sides, but I would hope that in my case, based on what I said in my opening statement, my experience, my dedication to this community, to my family, to the state of Florida, and the great strides that we've made, and that I was able to participate in the 6 years that I was in the House, that I can help this community continue to move forward with all these issues we've talked about today. So I think looking particularly at those undecideds that are going to watch on TV and the independents, look at the individual candidate. Look at their experience, look at their involvement, and as we always say, hey, hey, vote for Ray on November 6th. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kaplan.
Thank you. I just want to make a quick response. I just think it's a sin that both sides, the state of Florida and government in Washington, using Medicaid expansion as a pawn because they won't fix the dam in Lake Okeechobee. That's number one. But I want your support vote because I know how to crunch numbers, because USF taught me how to crunch numbers. That's what I did with USF. They gave me the critical thinking skills for me in order to debate a lawyer and a police officer. So if I'm not thrown in jail yet, I guess I'm doing okay. But the thing is, I've been here the longest. I was born in 1955. My father was the founder of one of the co-founders of Vidas Community Hospital in Vidas, Florida, Dr. Samuel E. Kaplan. My mother was a registered nurse who would happen to be in the Army too. My parents both served in the Army, and Tony, I haven't had a chance to thank you for your service in the Army. And I thank everyone who served to protect me. And all I want to do is not only protect America, I just love Florida. I saw a lot of changes because I'm older than dirt. And I appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Thank you all for participating today.